Councilmember Benson,
Here.
Councilmember Watton,
Here.
Councilmember Holloway,
Here.
Councilmember Washington,
Here.
Councilmember Cotton,
Here.
Councilmember Christensen, Councilmember Johnson is not present, and Mayor Ross.
I am here. Council, I expect Councilmember Johnson will be showing eventually, but do you want to go ahead and excuse his absences until he arrives?
So second.
Okay, so it's moved by Councilor Watton and second by Councilor Cotton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And Councilmember Johnson is excused until his arrival. Next, we have our first item, is special business, is to approve the agenda. Council may have a motion to approve the special meeting agenda.
So move.
Second.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Christensen. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And the agenda is unanimous. And so the special meeting agenda is approved. So the first item is review the draft city council agenda dated September 9th, 2024. Council, do we have any questions? Concerns regarding our draft agenda that we'd be using next Monday? And it actually starts off with a special workshop at 6 p.m. And do we have access to that? We can put it up there. So roundtable at 6 p.m. and then regular agenda starting at 7.
Is this? I'm sorry, man. Is this,
Councilor Washington.
this is tonight, not tomorrow night?
So this is next week,
Next week's agenda. Okay.
right? So usually we have an F&A committee meeting and that ended up being canceled. And so we're approving the agenda this evening for the draft agenda for next Monday. And then Monday when you arrive, of course, we'll approve the agenda as well.
Okay.
So this gives us a chance to go through it real quickly. If you have any questions or if there's anything that we need to add to it, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yes. So items of notice would be consent agenda, which would be the meeting minutes and the claims report. And then under public safety, the fire department second quarter 2024 accreditation report. And then mayor's report, liaison reports, department reports, and executive sessions. So it is not a lot of items for next week's meeting, but we will of course be focusing for the first hour right before that on the budget. So. Any comments regarding it? We may have one commissioner to add. And we will put that on. That's a possibility for one of the commissions. But other than that, any discussion regarding it? Okay. None. All in favor of the council agenda for September 9th, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? All right, so the agenda passes for our council meeting for next week. Next item is what the purpose where we're here today is the release and presentation of the mayor's proposed 2025-2026 biennial budget. And tonight we are presenting this budget. You will find that it's a balanced budget that is fiscally responsible and strategically positions us for a strong financial future. And it takes into consideration the city council's key priorities. And we have a special thank you to Janet Walker, our budget manager, and Drew Boutte, our director of finance, for their in-depth review of this process and valuable contributions of their time and expertise in this process. So tonight we'll ask our finance director, Drew Boutte, and budget manager, Janet Walker, to walk us through this.
All right, so thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I will note it's been a couple weeks since we've last seen you, and we want to thank you for that time because it's given us that time in order to really kind of develop this budget for you, having this last 2 weeks available to us. So we just want to kind of start off and thank you for that time that you've devoted back to us so that we can get this to you on today, at today's meeting. Coming up, we've got 2 meetings, so one today as well as one tomorrow to really kind of delve into this biennial budget. We know that you just received these materials today, and so consequently, a lot of today is going to be just us presenting you with information. Hopefully, we'll be able to get into some of the questions that you may have kind of later this evening, but as well as tomorrow, see where you kind of want to go with it at that stage. Right now, what you've got in front of you is a paper copy of the biennial budget. We have also sent that to you electronically as well, so you should have that in your email inbox. And then I want to say that we are very proud to present this budget to you. It's a culmination of a lot of hard work internally over the past couple months. And so I just want to thank everyone back here for their diligence in producing what here, and for Jana Walker as well for the amount of time and effort that she has spent behind the scenes just getting things ready and prepped for today. In terms of the agenda for the mayor's proposed 2025-2026 biennial budget, I'm going to provide you with an executive summary, then delve into the budget process, describe for you the budget document, provide you with a fund summary, get into some comparisons with the previous biennial budget, and then provide you with a position summary, highlights, as well as highlights for other things that we have in the budget, and then financial highlights as well. And then finally, finishing that up, afterwards, Jana Walker is going to be presenting you with a 10-year financial forecast review. In terms of just some housekeeping, some process items to start off with, we are going to send the presentation to you after tonight. In addition to that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Tonight, you can stop me at any point, you can interrupt, it's no problem. In some cases, we may not be able to answer those questions right away, and so we will come back to you at a later time with those answers. In addition, feel free to send an email with your questions. We're going to maintain a log of those email questions that once answered would be sent out to all council members. So similar to the CIP process a little bit, where we collected a number of questions through email, we'll kind of produce a log and then return to you with those answers so that you can maintain that and review that. Just to kick off in the executive summary, the 2023-2024 biennial budget required the city to face some really significant challenges. One of them was inflation. Certainly, we saw 9 to 10% increases in inflation over time. And then in addition to that, we also saw a lot of shifting labor market conditions that impacted pretty much every department, but more specifically, public safety, retention, and recruitment. And so the city really had to face those challenges during this last biennium and find the financial resources necessary in order to make sure that we can handle that inflation moving forward, but then also make sure that we protect and continue to provide the level of service expected out of our police and fire departments. As I mentioned, we tackled the inflationary environment and the impacts of the 1% property tax by maximizing current and finding new ongoing sources of revenue streams. That included council's approval of the 0.1% TBD sales tax earlier this year, as well as the recently voter approved 0.1% public safety sales tax. So we certainly made a pretty significant effort toward tackling the inflationary environment that has impacted not only families, but us as well. As a result, the city of Snoqualmie has kind of emerged from the pandemic and its impact financially more stable. But, you know, as a word of caution for everyone, and as a finance director would, we need to remain on top of that. We know that the lines will cross. We've been able to push out those lines, and Jana Walker is going to be delivering a presentation on that financial forecast later. But we need to remain on top of that, and we're going to have to develop strategies over time in order to push out that curve even more. The 2025-2026 biennial budget is slightly different. Slightly different because we're approaching the 25-26 period from a different position. A position where we're no longer having to deal with those pandemic challenges overall. And so it should feel a little bit lighter for the most part. A lot of that heaviness should kind of dissipate over time. And so consequently, our focus has changed. Our focus has changed to trying to find ways to continue to transform over the next 2 years to become even better. Our goal is to elevate the city in multiple areas to enhance our professionalism, improve responsiveness, foster innovation, and continue to ensure fiscal sustainability. One example that you're going to see in the budget that's going to continue in the next 2 years is the ERP system. The ERP system is designed to continue to professionalize the not the fire department, finance department, improve our responsiveness with things such as work orders, which the EAM system, the Enterprise Asset Management System, is expected to go live this month for the most part. And so there's a lot that we're going to do over the next 2 years in order to achieve these kind of 4 objectives that you see here. Just to get into the numbers a little bit, the 25-26 biennial budget proposes a total amount of $1.54.7 million, including $44 million for the general fund and $59.5 million in capital investments. We also, as the mayor alluded to, took a balanced budget approach to align resources with the needs as the community grows and increases demand for service. In addition to that, as the mayor stated as well, is it reflects council priorities, which are going to be evident to you throughout the document. Just to kind of repeat those council priorities overall. The first priority was to encourage economic vibrancy. Second priority was to enhance and preserve neighborhood livability and quality of life. The third priority was to invest in transportation and infrastructure. Number 4 was to assure a safe community. Number 5 was to ensure fiscal transparency and operational stability. And you'll see that demonstrated here, I think, and later within the presentation of how we're achieving those priorities, as well as you kind of read the document, you'll see a lot of that come through to you. Now we want to get into the budget process a little bit and what has been happening internally over the past couple of months. Budget process can be characterized as new process, new people, and new tools. Just to go over some pre-budget work a little bit, council has spent some time with the 2025-2030 capital improvement plan and developing the utility rate study. That's all going to influence the biennial budget moving forward. In addition to that, department divisions were required to develop work plans that align with the council priorities and level of service expectations for the next 2 years. The departments and divisions then developed budget requests that supported the accomplishment of the work plan. So you can start to see kind of the logic behind moving from the council priorities down to the budget level by having the departments develop those work plans and then really budgeting for those work plans. All budget requests were submitted through Munis. So this is, an indication of us using this new ERP system that we purchased. And department divisions were expected to provide detailed notes as well. So we got a lot of clarity and a lot of detail in terms of what they intend to accomplish for the next 2 years. For the most part, due to the level of work and effort that they put into really crafting those detailed notes for us so that we can understand what's going into the biennial budget. In addition to that, department divisions were allowed to propose increases in supplies, services, and capital outlays to match the council's priorities or to catch up and keep up with level of service expectations. Our old process usually included just an incremental increase. Everyone's budget might increase 3 or 4 or 5% annually for the most part, and that was taken for granted for the most part. We've done something different here, and that instead of keeping the same amount within the department year after year after year, we wanted to try to figure out ways if there was flexibility to shift dollars between the departments. If things were not working out, that money would go back into the pot and then might be redistributed to other departments. If we're no longer required to provide a level of service in certain areas, or if we've overfunded in certain areas, then those dollars were shifted into other priorities overall. And so as a consequence, we weren't just necessarily taking an incremental approach this year. We were really looking deeply into their budgets and asking the right questions. Do they actually need this money? What is it going for? And how is it going to best serve the community in the future? Because we're really trying to drive really the benefit overall that the government is providing to this community. And so we wanted to make sure that those dollars were shifted to where they're needed most. Just kind of go over, you've seen this framework before a little bit, catch up, keep up, step up. As I mentioned, the departments were directed to focus primarily on catch up and keep up, not necessarily step up. And so what does catch up mean? Well, it means what does the city need to do? And the question that we ask is, what does the city need to do to catch up to level of service expectations or fix existing service deficiencies. So if there is anything that we were not up to speed on, not provided at the level of expectation from the community, or if there's things that we haven't planned for properly in the future or in the past that we need to do so now, we want to make sure that we've allocated dollars basically to help support those programs and activities that we need to do so that we can achieve those level of service expectations over time. Keeping up in this instance is what does the city need to do to keep up with the growth and changing nature of the community? Basically meaning maintaining levels of service. In some cases, the city has grown in different areas, and so we need to make sure that we allocate the dollars necessary in order to protect that level of service that we're providing to the community over time. And then third, as I mentioned, we didn't necessarily get into this itself because we wanted to make sure that we focused on the basics and answered the core very well. What does the city need to do to step up and match the vision for the community? This is as if the level of service expectations are changing. If they're increasing, we want to meet those strategic objectives and invest in those areas. Then if there are any dollars kind of left over, we might do something like that. But primarily the departments were focused on what do we need to do to catch up with level of service expectations? And what do we need to do to keep up with level of service expectations?
May I just ask what, and this may be common knowledge for everybody else, but what is the performance metric used for these scores?
So there are different performance metrics per department. For the most. So you would have a different level of service expectation with the fire department when it comes to response times than you would, for example, the police department. Often the goals are translated into personnel per day for the most part. So if you're the fire department, you're looking for 3 firefighters on 24/7. Making sure that we maintain that level of service standard is critical. But then also a response rate that's indicative of what we've obtained historically in the past as well, which I think, for the fire department might be around 5 minutes 30, maybe a little bit higher than that. You might know a little bit more than I do about their common response times. When it comes to things like street resurfacing, that's another good one where you'll find a performance metric in terms of the pavement condition score. Often our standard has been roughly around 70. We haven't heard from council over time that we may want to increase that to 80 or let that drop to 60. But those performance metrics can have a role to play in the budget conversation overall, and that helps to kind of tell us what is council's level of service expectations when we go through a process of potentially.
Is the scores listed here and average of all the departments?
Well, this is just example.
Oh, just an example.
Yeah,
Okay.
just an example. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to diagram for you what that might look like and how you can conceptualize each of these kind of
So
different.
we don't have those numbers right now. It's
No,
as far as part of this.
Correct.
Ongoing. Thank you.
So
to continue with the budget process.
so Drew, I want to welcome Councilor Johnson.
Hey, Joe. So continuing along, changes in staffing levels were limited. The administration had determined what departments would potentially receive staffing increases, and so consequently, the departments were not asked to propose any sort of staffing increases beyond what the administration was prepared to recommend. In addition to that, the finance department provided estimates for revenues and personal and internal service costs. So consequently, if you were to think about what was the finance department doing and what was the other departments doing, the other departments were in essence providing us with their expenditure requests for supplies, services, and capital outlays, while the finance department was estimating revenues overall across all the funds, salary and wage expenses, employee benefit expenses, internal service charges, as well as transfers out. So combining both what the departments did as well as what finance did, you get a kind of holistic picture for each fund and each department moving forward. In terms of staffing cost inflators, these are the approved COLAs for 25 and 26. You'll see a couple categories listed as unknown. Down the road, or certainly today, depending on what council wants, we're happy to speak to you about that behind closed doors because it is subject to bargaining overall. And so consequently, we're not going to show anything regarding that here today. But I just wanted to relate to you what those COLA increases have been approved in the past. And so generally for 2025, you'll see those numbers incorporated part of the budget for what's been approved. In terms of some other kind of employee benefit expenses that are relatively large, health insurance overall, we've budgeted for 8.5% in 25 and 8.5% in 26. Recently, the Associated Cities of Washington came out with their estimate of what our health insurance premiums will be for 2025, and their range is between 7% and 8%. So that was just, I think, a couple days ago for the most part. So we've budgeted a little slightly higher than that at this point, which is good because, you know, once we have that figure in place, we can then come back and be more accurate, right? And reduce helps us overall. In terms of pensions, we've budgeted 8.27% for 25, and then for 2026, 7.5%. This is based on the information provided by the state actuary. So in terms of the Department of Retirement Systems here at the state level overall, you've got a state actuary that's estimating how much those employer contribution rates should be. And they're relatively accurate. We do have a very healthy, pretty much fully funded state retirement system overall. And so consequently, we are seeing those rates drop over time, which is actually beneficial to us because it means less expense in terms of pension. In addition to that, the finance department has assumed a 5% vacancy rate for departments and divisions located in the general fund. And this is going to be critical to one of the highlights that I'm going to bring up later in the presentation for the most part. But in essence, we're assuming that across the biennium, we're going to have a 5% vacancy rate in the general fund, which means we're going to save dollars basically. Right now, in the past, well, not right now. In the past, what we've done is we've budgeted for full staffing. We've assumed that all positions within the general fund, we would have someone in place from the start of the year to the end of the year. Therefore, we would budget fully for that position for the entire year. Well, that's a very conservative estimate, right, overall. So consequently, in order to free up some potential dollars for some of the highlights that we're going to be presenting in the future, or as part of this presentation, instead, we're assuming a 5% vacancy rate so that we can then take those dollars that we would have normally set aside for a full staffing assumption and turn those into dollars available for other things that we have going on within the city. And so there's going to be one key highlight in which that's related to.
Councilor Watton and then Councilor Benson.
So I appreciate that, Director Boutte. In the past, what has our actual vacancy rate been? It's significantly higher than the 5%.
It's been higher than the 5%. I will say HR has been doing a fantastic job of driving that down. And so this is almost, we're treating this as a floor. For the most part, really, well, I don't know if floor, but ceiling is the right word for that.
This is a conservative approach.
It's a conservative approach. I mean, 0% would have been a very, very conservative approach. 5% is still conservative. Over the past, I want to say year, we've probably had between 15 and 20% vacancy rate. Now, right now, it's probably around 5 to 10%. 10% is normal for the private sector generally overall. That's a good rule of thumb. And so we do think that 5% is relatively conservative, but if we need to come back in the future because somehow we've been less than 5%, then we'll do so through budget amendment and come back to you.
But it would be 0% would be overly optimistic
Well, yeah.
of full employment.
Yes, it would be overly optimistic of that. So right now, I'm not sure where. I have to start this. Okay, let's go.
Councilor Benson, did you have a comment?
My question was largely the same. We've talked in the past about the ability that we have with the budget to be irresponsibly conservative. We talk about the lines crossing and we fear the lines crossing, but if we push that off too far, then we're hoarding money.
Yeah.
Or so that we can push that up. So, but it sounds like what you're saying is 5% is a responsible level of conservatism.
It feels like a responsible level of conservatism to me. Yeah, for sure. And this is only for the general fund. This is not applied to the other funds necessarily. They have a smaller pool of employees, and so if you get one person out, you're already at 10%, for example. And so in the general fund, because you've got, I think, 50 to 60 FTEs in total there, generally the averages are not going to be, it's not going to be as volatile up and down in terms of the vacancy rate. And assume some degree of stability when it comes to that overall. So anyway, that we're applying that to the general fund in this situation. Maybe we'll venture a little bit more out, right? And take a very incremental approach. We'll see where we are, at the end of this 2-year period. If an average rate of 10% is more likely, then maybe we'll come back to you in the next biennium at 10%, right? So
So
we gotta test it out.
watch the market indicators to determine whether or not that 5% is sufficiently.
We'll be
conservative.
looking at, our FTE count internally, what's authorized, how many people do we actually have on staff, and what is that,
How long it takes to replace them.
yes. Mhm. So with the department directors and division managers present, the city had to engage in several rounds of trimming to ensure that the budget would reflect and match the resources available and forecasted for the 25-26 biennial budget. So in essence, we went through, okay, it's gone again. Sorry, guys. All right. Kick me out of the meeting. All right, okay. All right. So with the department directors and division managers present, the city engaged in several rounds of trimming to ensure that the budget would reflect and match the resources available and forecasted, in essence, balancing the budget. So obviously we have a budget balance required, and this means that we have to kind of live within our means over the next 2 years. And so we went through these rounds with the department directors and division managers, kind of figuring out what we need to really do, catch up, keep up, and what it might be a nice to have necessarily that we could hold off for maybe a future biennium if we have the financial resources available. As a consequence of this, the budget process helped to determine what department divisions can and cannot accomplish with the resources available and forecasted. So they are in a lot of ways superhuman, but not in every instance, especially if they don't have the financial resources available to them. And so consequently, in some cases, we're just not going to be able to do everything that everyone wanted necessarily. And so in some cases, we've had to tell people no or not yet as well. So that's the unpleasant part of this, is balancing the budget piece. Now we're going to get into the budget document a little bit. So we have this kind of handy dandy book right here. I happen to have the one that is purple but has sparkles on it. So lucky you guys for not getting this one. Overall, but I just kind of want to walk you through the budget document itself so that you're aware of what's in here. Page 3 includes the mayor's message. So you'll be able to see the message from the mayor, kind of laying out the high level vision overall for the budget document, and how that pervades throughout the entire document after that. In addition to that, you're going to find a financial forecast for our governmental operating financial bucket overall, starting on page 13. So it's that very familiar chart with the line crossing that you know about. And we've got some narrative to go along with that. On page 14, you're going to find yourself an executive summary that includes a summary, sources, uses, and fund balance for all funds. So in total, we've got about under 30 funds that you'll see listed there, which will include beginning fund balance, sources for the biennium, uses for the biennium, and ending fund balance as well. On page 17 is the general fund overview. So you're going to find a lot of information on the general fund moving forward. This will include not only what we're proposing in terms of the budget, but also staffing levels within the general fund. Some pie charts in there as well. And then basically high-level summaries as well, especially the major changes and additions to. So we wanted to make sure that we address the major changes and additions to the budget in here. And thanks to Janet for writing all this as well. Also provides you with a description of the departments, kind of their mission statement overall, as well as the core services they provide to the community. And then for each department itself, you're gonna find a budget table for them. That includes, it's separated by object, so separated by salaries and wages, employee benefits, supplies, services, capital outlays, and transfers out. And you'll find that starting on page 23. Starting on page 36, you'll find fund summaries for the other funds as well. So certainly have more than just the general fund. Includes things such as the non-utilities capital fund, the water operations fund, sewer operations fund, the stormwater operations fund, our internal services funds as well. Some of the managerial funds, special revenue funds. You're gonna find all the funds in here for the most part. And then lastly, we've got on page 66, the appendix. Some people might find the appendix a little bit, but there's a lot of great information back here, including a financial forecast table, the proposed budget ordinance table, a biennial budget comparison table, the organizational chart for the city, the non-utilities capital improvement plan that council approved, financial management policy that council approved earlier this year. As well as at the end of this, pretty much the Snoqualmie, city of Snoqualmie vehicle and equipment replacement schedule is right back there. So a lot of great information that's in the appendix.
Do you have a favorite?
Late night reading.
All of it's great, yeah.
Counselor Watton?
Well, thank you for providing this and I'm intrigued. I have a question and it relates to page 20 and it may help me become a little more comfortable around the numbers. And it's changes to ongoing sources of revenue. And I have to say, I just breezed over this and it just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more. And so hence that's the question. It says as part of the biennial budget, the following changes in revenue have been approved or are being proposed in order to generate new and ongoing sources of revenue. And I guess the ones that we haven't approved yet, if you could highlight those so that we know what we're anticipating, because it's all kind of in the numbers.
Jumbled together. Yeah.
It's in the numbers.
Yeah.
So it's just, what's our responsibility in order to make these things happen?
Correct. So there's only one
Okay.
part of this list right here. Every other action council has taken care of primarily this year. So the only one that is forecasted forward that we haven't completed is the comprehensive fee study.
Okay.
And indeed, there's an expenditure request in here as well as a part of the finance department request of hiring an outside consultant to come on board so we can conduct a comprehensive fee study.
Okay.
Not sure if you were here at the time during the last biennial budget, council had approved a position, the revenue manager position to support a comprehensive fee study. That has not happened during this past biennium 23-24. And so this is a carryover from the previous biennium 23-24 into 25-26. As a consequence, with that, council also previously approved in 23 and 24 an increase in revenue of $100,000 for 23 and $300,000 for 2024. We've just carried that forward into 25-26.
Follow-up question, if I may. And so the increased utility taxes, which is pretty significant, we've already have addressed that in
have, correct.
changes in our utility rates.
Want to come up?
We did address the utility rate changes with the agenda bill that related to the Transportation Benefit District tax, but you would still be expecting a change to ordinances because currently we divert about a third of our utility taxes into capital. So that would be forthcoming, but it was discussed earlier and approved as part of an agenda bill, but you'll be seeing it soon.
Thank you for the clarification.
And then this also includes the solid waste utility taxes. So the approval of the solid waste contract, which included on kind of the normal residential, then a 42% increase right in that rate overall. will impact how much we generate in terms of utility tax as well, because there's a 9% solid waste utility tax on top of that too. So if that is increasing 42%, then we can expect our utility tax revenue to increase as well by a similar amount too. Utility taxes include not only solid waste, but utility taxes on your water, sewer, stormwater. So the city's actually taxing the utilities that we have here, basically, and that money is basically reported in the general fund to support our activities of the general fund itself. Also, there's utility taxes on cable, telephone, electricity. Probably forgetting one out there, but there's a number of utility taxes, and so consequently, we kind of group those all together into just kind of one total overall. So
Telephone cable.
telephone cable,
Electricity.
yeah, electricity. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the utility tax, generally. Okay,
Excellent. Thank you.
all right. So with this document, you're gonna see a lot about funds. And just to kind of recall, refresh everyone's memory a little bit, our funds can be kind of broken up into 4 separate financial buckets at work. There's the governmental operating bucket, which pretty much contains the general fund and accounts for the goods and services provided by direct service departments and the administration of those departments. And is primarily funded through general taxes and fees and charges to external users. We've already had discussions on governmental capital, which is basically your non-utility CIP and accounts for the provision of non-utility capital assets. It's funded primarily through restricted taxes and fees such as the 0.1% TBD sales tax, the real estate excise tax, as well as committed taxes and fees and grants. And so county grants, the Washington grants, the grant for the Snoqualmie Parkway, all that is funneled through this bucket right here. In terms of the enterprise funds, AKA utilities, for the most part, accounts for the goods and services provided by those utilities and is funded through charges to those external users. So we treat the utilities much more like a business than we would necessarily fire or police overall, because they're charging for the cost of service provided to the community. And includes water, wastewater, and stormwater. And then last, we've got internal services, which accounts for the goods and services provided to other departments. And it's funded through charges to those other departments. So those other departments are their customers. If you're ER&R, the other departments is your customer. If your facilities, the other departments are your customer. If you're IT, the other departments are your customer. And so consequently, those are kind of the 4 primary financial buckets. You're looking at how to break down the fund structure that we have. And I mentioned that we've got probably slightly under 30 funds in total. I've just tried to color code some things here a little bit. But this is kind of how we would relate each fund to the different colored buckets that you saw here recently. So governmental capital encompasses primarily the general fund and has some functional classifications. When you're looking at the police department of Snoqualmie, the police department in general, because it includes North Bend as well as a part of that, you're looking at governmental operating. If you're thinking about the fire and emergency management, you're looking at governmental operating. If you're thinking about the utilities, you're looking at the enterprise funds itself. You're thinking of Don Harris and his fleet and facilities program overall. You're thinking of an internal service fund. And if you're thinking about the CIP, generally the non-utility CIP, you're really looking at that kind of blue area, that governmental capital. And so that's how you can get to those buckets and kind of what revenue sources are generally flowing through that for the most part, what kind of expenditures come through those buckets, and how we translate that into a fund structure. Because what you're going to see on page 14 is this all fund summary, and it can get a bit confusing, right? Overall, it's a pretty comprehensive summary that you've got here. I don't expect people to read this, so that's why you've got the page number. So feel free to go to that page number if you so desire. But what you're going to find as a part of this all fund summary is beginning fund balances, sources, uses, and the ending fund balance for each fund that we have here at the city of Snoqualmie. And at the bottom, you're going to see a total for all funds. Now, the question you may have is sources. What are sources? Well, sources not only include revenues that the city collects from outside, but also other increases in fund resources that are handled internally. In addition to that, uses includes not only just expenditures, us spending money and sending money out the door, but also the police department paying IT for the provision of services to them as well. And so consequently, we tend to use terms such as sources and uses because we want to differentiate that between revenues and expenditures. When you look at that total uses column, which is the second to last that you see there, that is your appropriation amount, or what we would request in terms of an appropriation. We'll get into some definitions here a little bit soon.
Counselor Benson.
So I worked for a company once where you could send things to service, and it was an internal part of the company where they serviced products, and then they'd send them back to you and you could sell them. And they screwed you. They just it was ridiculously expensive to send stuff to service. And so we just didn't. We fixed stuff ourselves and then put it back on the floor. I always hated that about that business. Is it similar with a city government, or does that aspect of the whole system have to run at a zero?
No, so the fire department, for example, has to budget for how much they're spending on IT services. And so there's a.
But
charge-
IT's not overcharging the fire department.
Yeah, so the goal is to not overcharge, right, departments, but in some cases they are, it's 6 FTEs in the IT department overall that you have to allocate out between the different departments overall. So finance department, Jana in particular right here, has to go through a process of figuring out what those allocation factors are, and then dividing the entire pie for, say, Don Harris and his fleet of facilities or IT out and amongst all the direct service departments. and
Because you
basically
can't
are-
lay off a quarter of an FTE for 3 months because you weren't using it, basically.
Uh,
It's gotta be paid for.
it's got to be paid for, right? If we budget, right, overall what those expenses are, but once we start gathering actuals, then we're going to be able to true up what those overhead charges should have been. So that's what we would do over time, is there's a true up that would come through that effort overall.
Yeah, those words never came up in the business that I was.
Comment, City Administrator Chambliss.
Council, I'd also remind you that we are now in the Munis world. We are now in the new software. So with Public Works going live with their EAM this week, actually, and IT will be following along shortly thereafter. They will be now charging their time on their time cards to projects, which was not occurring in the past. So in the next budget cycle that we go through, it's not helping us right now, but in the next budget cycle we go through, it is going to be very accurate of where time is being spent and where it is allocated.
So the true up's just ongoing.
Correct.
Counselor Johnson.
Yeah, so I was looking at the beginning fund balance and ending fund balance on this table. And then comparing it to the same on page 17, ending fund balance from 23-24, which should be the beginning balance for 25-26. And there's a massive difference between them. One of them's 4 million, some on almost 5 million for the ending fund balance on that table, and 1.6 million. I'm sure it's just I don't know what I'm looking at. So if you could just explain the difference.
The table that you're seeing on 17 is
Yeah.
the budget from 23-24, and we made it in 2022. So that was our best guess at where we'd be December 31st, 2024. And now 2 years later, we have a little bit better guess of where we're going to be. So the number that you're seeing, and you'll see that throughout, all of those blue and gray or white tables show 2023-24 budget and then 25-26 budget. So you won't see
Got it.
any of those ending and beginning agree.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, so as a part of this table as well, how do we get to ending fund balance at the end of the 2-year period? And just want to make sure that this is well known. We start with the beginning fund balance, we add sources, we subtract uses, and that gets you your ending fund balance amount. So in essence, that's how you would read this table, is basically from left to right, add the sources, subtract out the uses, and that gets you to your ending fund balance. In total, what you're going to see is our ending fund balance, or our fund balances drop across not all funds necessarily, but total for all funds from $39 million to $27.8 million. A lot of that is because of the capital funds. You'll see those decrease over time because we're budgeting for the non-utilities capital fund. In terms of some of the operating funds, such as the general fund, or if you're looking at the enterprise funds, such as the water operations fund, the wastewater operations fund, and the stormwater operations fund, you're going to see some of those fund balances actually increase. And so there's a distinction between that a little bit. A lot of what the spend down is over time is really out of the capital funds, and that's largely because we've budgeted for the community center as a part of this. Obviously pending the ability to get those grants in the door, but we're seeking to appropriate for that community center as a part of this total budget.
Counselor Watton.
So one other thing too to point out is we're in the end of August. So these are projected beginning fund balances, which could be different by year end. They could be higher than what you've anticipated, because sometimes we don't spend everything that we think we're going to spend and it falls over. How is that going to be addressed, I guess, with the council and because if we're going to approve this and things are slightly different in the past, has it been a big change or a little change in how these ending fund balances look?
For the majority of the funds, it's been relatively minimal. You know, a margin of error, maybe 5-10%, right? Generally overall, but we would do our best to estimate where we're going to end up. Well, at least we've got 8 months of data for this year, which can help us with the forecasting of where we're going to be by the end of the biennium for the most part. But what we would typically do is we'd probably come back in the new year when there's an opportunity for us to present to you a budget amendment and then true up those beginning fund balance numbers at that kind of stage.
So it is realistic that the total all funds, for instance, the beginning balance could be $2, maybe $3 million actually higher than what we're going to be looking to approve.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. You're thinking of the capital funds as well, depending on what that spend rate is. You know, what the conditions are for the winter, right? For the most part, that can influence what the beginning fund balance kind of looks like overall. And the goal would be to come back next year with a budget amendment to true up those rates. Another thing that we're going to do as a part of this as well is we've talked about continuing appropriations specifically for the projects as well. So instead of appropriating, you know, we might still have report fund balances, but overall we're appropriating for the project budget in total. And so consequently, the budget ordinance might look a little bit different because of that.
Thank you.
All right. So next we're going to get into kind of a biennial budget comparison. I think this is important because it's going to describe the change between the current biennium and the next one. But first, I kind of want to get into some terms. And I guess just to start off with, the biennial budget comparison table is going to reveal a complex and interconnected system of departments and funds that provide a diverse set of public goods and services. And so consequently, the city does a lot. You know, I've been reflecting on this recently, but you know, what organization, you know, on the one hand spends an hour, you know, trying to figure out how to allocate dollars for opioid treatment, and then in the next hour focus on how to set up a hazardous waste program. You don't necessarily find that, I think, in the private sector, which makes government especially complicated just because, you know, our hands are stretched across a lot of different areas that have no relationship to each other. And so consequently, it can be very complex and it's a very interconnected system as well between the different departments charging each other and so on. I want to caution everyone before we kind of get a little bit further into this, the city is continuously thinking about what fund departments to best charge expenditures, and the proposed budget reflects those decisions that are made throughout the year. So in some cases, we may be charging legal service expenses to the city attorney's budget, but then in other cases, there are potentially other legal expenses where we shouldn't be charging the city attorney, but maybe directly charging one of the other departments for the most part. So we're always kind of continuously thinking about where to best place that. And in some cases, that's going to get reflected in the budget itself, which may describe some of the variation that you're seeing, I think, overall between the changes. Some of the definitions that you're going to come across in time. Appropriation. Appropriation means it's basically the legal spending level authorized by ordinance. So the city cannot exceed this level without prior approval of council. Hypothetically, if the city has a $1 million fund balance, council can appropriate only $100. And guess what? We can't spend greater than $100. And so that's our limit, and that's council's discretion of what to set that limit at. We have to live within that, whatever it said. In some cases, people get a little bit funny when it comes to this, because they may say, well, you know, council has given us, you know, $100 million of appropriation, but we only have $100 in the bank. And then I'm telling them, no, you still can't spend. Because then we don't have the money, right? Necessarily. And then we're running deficit. So there's a little bit of a dance that kind of gets played between budgets and actuals, I think, overall. Appropriation includes the anticipated spending on employees and outside vendors for services rendered, supplies bought, or capital assets constructed. Money leaving the city's coffers, but it also includes the money that flows internally between the different funds. So like I mentioned, we've got a budget. Fire department has the budget for IT services, fleet services, admin services as well. All those overhead charges have to be budgeted for too. In addition to that, the next one after that is transfers out. Transfers out represent the money that is transferred between funds. For example, the budget proposes a $1.3 million transfer from the Water Operations Fund to the Utilities Capital Fund. The rate revenue that we generate is collected in the Water Operations Fund. And so in order to use that money for capital projects, we have to then transfer. It's just showing that my internet's unstable. So that's what that was up there. Anyway, so consequently, we have to consider what the money that we're transferring between the different funds, and we have to appropriate for those transfers out. Furthermore, internal service charges represents the costs of certain departments that can be charged to other departments for the provision of goods and services, must be based on a plan that is fair and equitable. So in your case, it wasn't fair and equitable, Councilmember Benson, but our goal is to be fair and equitable when it comes to that. And then lastly, operating capital expenditures, which you're all very familiar with. And so we're attempting to determine the amount of money that was or has been budgeted to leave the city to employees or outside vendors. What money's leaving the city's pockets and going somewhere else for the most part. And so with that said, we can produce a biennial budget comparison summary for you. What you're going to see is the total appropriation between 23-24 and 25-26 has what we're proposing is a decrease of 7.1% in the total appropriation. And a lot of the reason for that decrease in the total appropriation is for within three areas. So the transfers out, we're proposing to drop that from $19.8 million in the previous biennium to $9.4 million in the 25-26 biennium. A lot of that reflects the actual fund consolidation work that we did for the previous two bienniums. And so consequently, we don't have to transfer out as much as we used to or transfer between the funds. In addition, what you're going to see for the internal service charges, you're going to see an increase from $14.0 million, 23-24 to $17.4 million for 25-26. And we'll get into that as a part of the highlight section overall that's coming up. In terms of capital expenditures, you're going to see a decrease between $69.8 million for 23-24 to $59.5 million for 25-26. A lot of that's going to reflect the fact that we had the community center budgeted for 23-24, but then as well as the completion of the wastewater reclamation facility project and some of those kind of larger ticket items such as the Snoqualmie Parkway rehabilitation project as well. In terms of operating expenditures, what we're proposing is an 8.6% increase between the 23-24 biennium to the 25-26 biennium overall, and that should give you kind of a real sense or idea of what we're proposing in terms of an increase overall, what that kind of looks like, especially once you start to subtract the transfers out and the internal service charges as well. What is that kind of real number of money that's actually leaving the city's doors kind of looking like overall? So with that, I'm going to get into a position summary for everyone as well. So across the departments, the administration is proposing a 4.24 FTE increase, which includes a reduction in the administrative departments, reduction in IT, although that position is moving to another department. And then increases in the fire emergency management department, parks and public works department, as well as the police department. So in total, an increase we're proposing of 4.24 FTEs. And FTEs stand for full-time equivalent employees. And just to kind of give you some of the highlights of that, we're proposing to add 3 additional firefighters. The goal of these 3 additional firefighters is to reduce both overtime costs and stress on firefighters who have been required to work overtime in order to maintain the mandatory number of firefighters per shift. There are 3 shifts out there, and so this would add 1 additional firefighter to each shift. This would not be an increase in the level of service expectation. So we would still want to maintain 3 firefighters 24/7. Having 4 on a shift would be great. If someone's on vacation or out, we're no longer going to have to backfill that position with mandatory overtime in order to maintain that coverage. So what we've seen over time is we've staffed up to the minimum coverage required, but not beyond that. And that has impacts when it comes to overtime costs and so on. Basically, what we're proposing here is to use that savings, those budgetary savings from the 5% vacancy rate to convert that into the 3 positions and then save what we can in terms of overtime over time for the most part. So,
Say it one more time.
yeah. Over time. Yeah. So consequently, that is the kind of mechanism that we're requesting here is through this budget to fund these 3 firefighter positions. In addition, the administration is proposing the increase, 1 FTE increase, in administrative specialists in the police department for North Bend. So this was included as a part of our offer to North Bend relatively recently. And the goal is to help the department step closer towards accreditation, support higher levels of public record requests, and improve evidence maintenance processes. Currently, the city of Snoqualmie funds 2 administrative specialist positions within the police department. North Bend funds 1. And so we're looking to equalize that between both cities. In addition to that, we are proposing a.
Drew, can you go back on that one? please?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
We're adding administrative specialists.
Yes.
We currently have 2.
We currently have 3 authorized FTEs in the police department. This would increase that by 1 to 4.
And currently it's 2 for Snoqualmie, 1 for North Bend.
Correct.
And this is an add to North Bend
Correct.
between 2. Primarily, as you said, to help with some things, also help with accreditation. Are we accredited at the department level or are we accredited by city?
So this would be a national organization, right, that would accredit the police department, but the goal is to work towards that accreditation. Having that additional position will help us to work on a lot of those goals that have been presented to us recently, what we need to do to get there.
But this is contingent upon North Bend's agreement to that additional aid.
It is, correct. And so that's going to be one of the uncertain elements when it comes to the budget is where does the North Bend Police Services contract go in terms of the negotiation process? So we have to be mindful of that as well.
Okay, on the firefighters, what's our current overtime rate?
Our current overtime rate.
Yeah.
I don't have that per FTE necessarily, how much we're spending on average between the firefighters, but I think we spent roughly $400,000 or close to that for 2023. I'm not sure where we stand when it comes to 2024.
So that's about 2 equivalent to about 2 FTEs,
Yeah, pretty close.
and we're expecting that to go away.
No, we're not expecting all of it to go away. So we have budgeted for some overtime, but not as much as we would have needed to if we didn't have those positions or the request in place potentially.
Councilor Johnson. And then,
Oh, sure.
then Councilor One.
I was just wondering what the benefit is of that specific accreditation that we do not currently have that makes it worth that extra expenditure.
At this point, I'm gonna have to signal to the bullpen, basically.
evening. So the benefits of accreditation are, it would give us the ability to do everything correctly and up to standards. And it is a state accreditation. It's not a national accreditation. It is one that is provided by the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, WASPIC. Benefits to the city is that it can help lower insurance rates on the police department. Benefits to the residents of the city is that it can also help on homeowners insurance if their police department is accredited. And it would give us the ability to say that we do everything correctly, which would lower the risk of liability going to court over different things that, if we weren't doing everything correctly. It just opens us up to more litigation in the future. So that's the main goal, is to give the citizens of the city and North Bend the best police department possible.
Counselor Watton, did you still have a question?
Yeah. Could we
Please
go
talk
back
about
to
that.
that 5% vacancy rate? Because really, it's not just the staff of 15 of the fire department. Some of that is coming over a larger pool
Correct.
of our staffing, because that's not going to be enough. We're most likely going to be either fully staffed or almost fully staffed in the fire department, but overall the city, that's where the 5% we can help backfill for that third position. 2 positions we can justify from reducing overtime. The third position comes from the overall strategy.
Correct. Yeah,
Of
so it's
the
kind of
cities.
multiple funding,
Okay.
right, streams that would support those 3 firefighters. You're absolutely correct. It's pulling from a larger pool of resources. So likely, if you've got firefighters, vacant positions, you're having to backfill that with mandatory overtime, right, overall. So still, there's a cost associated with that, but there are administrative positions, right, within the general fund. The community development department, for example, some of those other departments within the general fund itself that we're not backfilling with mandatory overtime necessarily. So those are vacant positions that may sit open for quite some time, depending on their ability to get to it, HR to get to it, right, overall, that we could then redeploy those resources to make sure that we've got a, fully staffed fire department that is not stressed and burned out, right, over time.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
In part, my question, you have to separate need from how you're funding. My question in part was, how are you defining the need? Why is it 3? Could it be 2? Should it be 4? I don't know. But why is it 3? So what's your basis of estimate for the need of 3? How we fund it becomes a different question. And part of that is reduced overtime as a result of the resource being available, as well as the shift of this 5% variance and yada, yada. But I'm still, I'm picking at why 3?
Here's your answer.
I know, he's coming.
So the 3 was landed on based on that we have 3 shifts. We have minimum 3 personnel per shift. We have 4 personnel right now on shift, 1 lieutenant, 3 firefighters. Somebody's always gone based on a contractual day, so that's where we get down to the 3. I looked at different options, 1, 2, 3, adding different personnel, and 3 made the most sense because by putting 5 on shift, we're always going to be down to 4 because somebody's always going to have a day off. And then that would give us the flexibility of not having to pay overtime then when the way the department has been operating the last 2 years, we've always had somebody on disability, unfortunately, things like that. So we've been falling below that minimum 3 we have to hire back. So by putting 1 per shift, that just gives us an extra hedge. And like I've told the Public Safety Committee, the term I use is building a deeper bench so that we can absorb those losses when somebody is off shift for L&I, somebody leaves the department, and it will keep us from having to do the mandatory overtime. So there's other ways we could do it. There's other shift configurations, but 3 made the most sense to be able to utilize it so where we're not having as much overtime. They asked earlier, there's still going to be overtime for training classes, administrative meetings, things like that. but our shift overtime is gonna drastically decrease just because we'll have 4 and not 3. And we'll be able to absorb that flexing in one person.
Counselor Cotton.
So I have a couple of statistics I was hoping the chief could provide. You had told me we had jumped from, was it like 150 hours of overtime in 2022 to 2023 was like 1,500 or 1,300 hours of overtime?
When we have our presentations in front of the public safety, I'll be able to hit them the exact numbers, but I do know that in before the pandemic in 2018, our mandatory overtime was like 55 hours a year for the whole department. And this last year, our mandatory overtime was 1,700 hours. Just because of the, like I said, we had to go below, and our overtime back then was, I want to say 3,000, and we had over 6,000 hours of overtime just in general. And then 1,700-ish of that was for mandatory. And that's what we're trying to eliminate, is really that mandatory overtime. The forcing the people to come back into work in order to get the people on the road, and looking at the different configurations. That's where, like I said, the 3 people would help us achieve that the easiest. There's other ways too. We can do some different shifts, but really the 3 is what will make it the easiest to lower that overtime, take the stress off the firefighters, and be able to build that deeper bench, as I put it.
Can I
Counselor Cotton, continue.
follow up on that? Just as part of this also is the fact that by forcing people to do mandatory overtime, so if you put in to go to your daughter's wedding 6 months ago, and then all of a sudden somebody's out with an injury, out sick, out on whatever, you can get called back in. No questions. You just have to go in and work for us to be able to run a unit or staff for the city. But the other part of this is also the retention. If you've got people that are burned out all the time, that are dissatisfied and don't have a personal life, they're gonna look for other places to go work. It's both with the fire and police departments. We need to be able to, not only hire people, but retain people. And so far, we haven't been able to do that. A lot of our new trainees, you just get them up to their 1-year probation and they're off to another department. The dark horse who shall not be named.
Counselor Benson.
Well, and then just the back of the napkin math, if you've got 1,700 hours of overtime, even if it's at the minimum time and a half, that's over 2,500 hours of actual pay, which is, I think, like 25% more than 1 FTE. So if you can eliminate all or most of that, then you just replace your overtime with an employee.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, and then Counselor Christensen.
No, but, okay. Mandatory overtime, bad. Got it. Agree with it totally. Okay, but I'm asking a math question. Okay, that what you've said, there's 1,700 hours of mandatory overtime. We need to get rid of that. That's a head and half. Okay, so, but I can't hire half a head. So you got me to 2. To hire 3 because I have 3 shifts. There's some flexibility for 2 to cover 3 shifts in some way or another.
And that's where I'm saying the most efficient is to do 1 per shift, because even though we do have other schedules available to us, for example, we have a schedule where they could work 4 12s in a row and then have 4 12s off, but it's not as efficient for covering the 24-hour shifts. And so when you look at it all together, I'll be able to cut the overtime more by having that extra person than I would if, for example, if I had 2 firefighters that worked back and forth. One worked 4 days of 12, the other worked 4 days of 12, and they just rotated back and forth. It's set up that they could fill in for 24 hours of overtime during those days. But the way it pencils out on paper, it just doesn't work out to reduce the amount of overtime like we're trying to do. It would reduce it some, but it wouldn't reduce it as much as having that extra person on shift so that I don't have to hire back to 3. I could fall down to 3 if I need to, worst case scenario, but I don't have to hire back to 3. And the goal is also with this, and again, it would be coming out later, but this also gives us more flexibility by having 4, or I say 4 firefighters because somebody's always gonna have the day off, but really with 4 people on shift, it gives us more flexibility to split the crew and to be able to have rigs available in the city more often than we are right now, just because we'll be able to utilize the volunteers for transports, break the crew apart. Maybe 2 people go off on a transport with the 8 car. 2 or 3 would be able to stay behind and keep a rig available in the city. So there's not only is it going to be adding these firefighters is going to reduce our overtime and some of the other stuff we talked about, it is also going to give the city some more flexibility in having a unit available all the time in the city by utilizing the volunteer staff and these extra people to be able to split the rigs. Right now with 3 people, we can't split a rig. If I have 4 on shift, I'd be able to send an 8 car and then leave an engine here in the city. Or even if it was just 2 people left in the city with the engine, they can't respond to a fire call per se because 2 in and 2 out, some of our regulations, but they could go to an 8 call with the engine. So there's some added benefit besides the overtime piece.
And it's just, you guys gotta help me with the math questions. It's always gonna be a math question to start with me.
Mhm.
And then I need to hear the added benefits for carry it forward. So
I
I'm
will
good.
work on
Thank
them.
you.
When we do some of our other presentations, I'll add some actual numbers in there as to what we're looking to do with that.
Cool, thank you.
So we had Councilor Christensen next and then Councilor One.
I was just gonna add briefly that another issue in addition, if we're having firefighters being called back for mandatory work, not only is it going to be like a morale and that type of thing, but it also is just they need to have a chance to rest their bodies, right? They're doing really intensive work. And if you have people that are gonna be physically overworked and everything else, you're more likely to see injuries and, mental issues from just not ever getting a chance to unplug them. That's my other comment.
Councilor One.
Thank you, and I appreciate those comments, Councilmember Christensen. I think the other thing too is that we're seeing, especially in the fire and emergency responses, those numbers are climbing and they climb during the day. We can, and those might be helpful to have that context in here because during the middle of the night, it's not as intense as during the day. And I do keep a tick mark for every time our engines go past or our aid car goes past my office in North Bend. And sometimes it's 2, sometimes 3 times a day we're doing mutual aid. And every time one of those units rolls, it means we don't have a unit here to help our citizens. So I think, there's a combination of things, and this number of reaching 3 is really critical so that we always have people. And the last thing in that is it gives us the ability for the fire department to do the proactive outreach that they need to do, and they just haven't had the staffing to do. And finally, it's also working with the volunteers because we're very blessed with the fact of having all these other almost a dozen volunteers at any time that are available. But if our full-time staff isn't available to help with that, as far as mentors and plugging them in, we're missing out on a huge opportunity. So increasing response times, making us safer, and being more thoughtful with the dollars that we have. I think, if we're going to make an investment anywhere, this is the place to make it.
I'll make sure that when we do our presentation in our committees, that I add information in the fire department presentation to hit some of those highlights, not only the dollar amounts that we've been talking about that I've been working with Jen on, but also to focus on some of those things you talked about, the volunteer, some of the other enhancements we will see because of the increase of adding the firefighter per shift.
Councilor Benson.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like about Drew's explanation of the initially the 5% vacancy rate, looking that holistically across the city rather than department by department, feels kind of like a little bit of 3-card Monty moving stuff around. But what I really like about this example is it allows us to say, hey, here's a department where we actually have life and limb on the line. And we need to address that in an appropriate way. Right now, they're working way too much overtime. And this strategy allows us to take some of that breathing room that we have maybe in other departments and reallocate it to where we don't have breathing room. We don't have breathing room in the fire department. And so I appreciate that about this. And you know, I think also Drew's explanation of the 5% being a pretty responsibly conservative number gives us the kind of room to say we need more firefighters, and that needs to be made a priority. So I like what I'm hearing, although I do also appreciate your due diligence on math.
Oh, I may ask questions, things I totally agree on, just to hear the logic. I mean, we need to know, we need to have, as a group, gone through that kind of stuff. Due diligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Bailey.
All right, thank you. All right, so furthermore, beyond public safety, we are also requesting one additional administrative specialist in the Parks Public Works Department to support the utilities. Currently, we have one administrative specialist within the department that's supporting 6 divisions of the department and 37 total employees, which, you know, is a level of service standard in that department for administrative help that exceeds what the other departments have overall. The goal of this position is to provide dedicated support to the utilities, which currently share that administrative specialist position. But of course, there's always the caveat that this is currently under consideration for the utility rate study. So really, this is a placeholder. We're going to be coming back and having discussions about the utility rate study in the future, understanding what the rate impact is right overall, and under consideration of what those rate impacts are. This position may continue to stay within the budget or could be subtracted in the future. In addition to that, we've also incorporated one wastewater operator position, which is to support the operational function of wastewater collection and treatment facilities during assigned shifts and emergency situations. In addition to that, I think we know that we've got a $13 million project happening out there at the water reclamation facility. At this moment, it's going to require additional support to keep that up and running effectively. In addition, it's in accordance with the general sewer plan that council adopted about 2 years ago, I want to say, roughly or so. But once again, this is also under consideration for the utility rate study. So there's always that caveat. The council could decide when we continue to have those discussions on the utility rate study to pull that position out. Next,
And say Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
sorry.
Go back. Okay, I need a rewrite on that first one. Right now it reads, I don't like to share. I need to know what level of service impact we're having as a result of this position. Are we not keeping up with something, or is the overtime out of whack, or what? That reads, I don't like to share. This is why I'm asking you the math questions, guys. Doesn't do it for me. Okay, so help me understand why we need this position.
Which one are you talking about?
The first one. I understand the second one because you put the right term in there, said in accordance with general sewer plan. We already did the operations study and said that position needs to be there. Got it. I'm all sold on that one. The top one. I need to understand because that bullet doesn't do it for me.
Shanna, before you jump in, would you like us to do that at the Parks and Public Works
Yeah,
Committee
let's do,
breakout?
I
or
don't, that's a homework assignment.
They're prepared to do that.
Councilor Watton.
One other comment. I know that in certain positions, we've had vacancies that have been, it's been for cities. And I'm not saying that this is unique to Snoqualmie because our sister city, North Bend, has had the same challenges with filling and keeping folks in these departments. And if we can have some context behind that, it would be helpful.
Currently, they're fully staffed.
currently we are, but as an industry and this particular classification across cities, especially smaller cities, it's been a challenge.
It has been recently. Things are settling down a bit now. But I do believe, and I'm gonna call to the bench to get up there if I get his exact comment wrong. But I do believe that you said for the first time in 4 years, we are fully staffed in the sewer or water department, or you didn't say that and Jeff said it. One of the two of you said. Jeff. But I do believe this is the first time in 4 years we have been fully staffed in water and sewer. And that goes to the benefit of the work you did with the Teamster CBA.
Right. Counselor Johnson?
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify that you were talking about a specific department, not in general, because my understanding is that, from what I last heard was the community development was struggling with, retaining employees, recruiting and retaining. Or are they also fully staffed?
They are not fully staffed.
Okay, that's what I thought. You were talking about a specific department, not in general.
I'm talking
Yeah,
about
okay.
specifically water and sewer.
So there are position subtractions as well that we also need to mention too. So one of them is a term limited management analyst position and 1 term limited revenue manager. In the finance department, that's primarily because we did not complete the objectives of each position in order to convert them to full time. So consequently, because we haven't fulfilled some of those goals within the department itself, we can't come back to you and say that we need to retain those positions moving forward. And so consequently, those are a couple of the position subtractions. In terms of changes and conversions, we have moved the deputy city clerk / legal assistant from the city attorney's office to the city clerk's office and converted 1 management analyst position into an account position. So if you're worried about the finance, don't worry. I'm very lucky to have a new account on board. Her name is Ellen. She's been really great for us and I'm excited to see what she can do. In addition to that, we've converted 1 IT manager position into an IT systems engineer position overall so that we would have 2 within that department. We moved the GIS analyst from the IT department to the Parsifal Works department, as well as converted 1 administrative specialist position in the CD department to an assistant planner position too. And so you're going to see those changes and conversions as a part of the budget. Next, I just want to explore some of the other highlights that you're going to find as a part of the biennial budget. And as I mentioned, it was a focus specifically on items necessary to catch up or keep up with the level of service expectations. The first one right there, the strategic plan will help us to establish those level of service expectations. And the goal of the strategic plan is to help the city to think more deeply about its current opportunities and challenges, provide guidance and direction to departments, uncover ways to protect key services, and find those strategic investments that will help propel the city into the future. Next on that list is payroll recalculation. So we've had a conversation with council about having to go through this effort. The goal is to recalculate payroll for 23 and portions of 24. 23 for those that we haven't done yet at this point, which means everyone but Teamsters. That were due to certain errors that were discovered this year. This recalculation will ensure that employees were neither overpaid nor underpaid during the time period. And so the goal would be to hire an outside auditing firm to come in and to support that effort. In addition, as mentioned previously, we have also included a comprehensive fee study that would look into all city fees, including building permits, the use of recreational fields, especially with the World Cup coming up, staffing rates, ambulance transports, and consider the degree to which the city should cost recover through its fee structure. So there are certain departments and divisions that are primarily recovered through fees. For example, building is a great example of that overall. Building permits are there to support the department or the division overall. And so majority of them are, that division is covered through the building permit revenue that they generate. In addition to that, we're also requesting 4 new vehicles, which would include the purchase of 1 wildland brush truck for the Fire and Emergency Management Department, which will expand the functionality of the department in off-road situations, especially if there's a fire that's happening in a wooded area somewhere, we'll be able to get there relatively quickly. And then 3 pickup trucks for the utilities in order to match staffing levels. So we are short 3 pickup trucks in the department. It's necessary for people to go out into the field. And so we need those vehicles in order to get people basically to the work that's required to be done.
I would also state that the Wildland truck is small enough that it can maneuver through some of our city streets and back alleys as well.
Next on the list is 6 backup pumps. So in the event of a pump failure at sewer lift stations, backup pumps will prevent any system failure and allow the waste system to continue to operate. So we think that's necessary, especially in emergencies, making sure that that system operates effectively. And then lastly, another huge item for us overall is repairing the equipment replacement or repair fund. And, you know, much like overtime, repair. Same sort of story a little bit here in this situation. What we've discovered in the finance department is this fund was expected to go insolvent within the next couple years. There are multiple reasons for that overall. That includes inflation estimates that haven't lived up. Actually, inflation has been more than what we've estimated in the past. In addition, we've estimated the value of a vehicle in the first year when it was purchased, but because of inflation, we've been charging the same amount to each department, for example, a 20-year period, if that's the life cycle of the vehicle, but we were never going through and updating what the actual current value of the vehicle is for the most part. And so the goal is to really reflect what the current value of the vehicle is at this point, which has required us to change the methodology in allocating those costs to the other departments and divisions. And so across the departments and divisions, you're going to see their replacement charges increase basically for ER&R. In addition, in the past, we haven't been funding appropriately important vehicle accessories and support items. As a result of that, they've been largely using budget for the replacement of vehicles to support those vehicle accessories and support items, thinking about radios or different aspects like that, mounting inside police vehicles, mounting for fire apparatuses and so on, for example. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we budget appropriately for the repair of city vehicles involved in accidents. So our city vehicles have been involved in some accidents over time for the most part, in which we've had to pull from the amount that we've budgeted for the replacement of other vehicles in order to get that back in the door. Now, certainly insurance does pay us, but we have a deductible. So consequently, they're not paying us for the full replacement value of the vehicle. They're paying us for a portion of that. But we need to make sure that we've got the budget there, the appropriation there in order to cover all that without impacting the general replacement of other vehicles. And in addition to that, we need to make sure that we budget appropriately for contracted services such as the Puget Sound Regional Fire Authority as well, which we haven't done adequately in the past. And so those are kind of the major changes for the repairing the equipment replacement repair fund. And I can't tell you how impactful it is to make sure that this fund is adequately funded, not only now, but well into the future. You can put people out, right, into the field and working, but they need the tools available in order to get the job done. And so it's really important for us to kind of protect this fund moving forward. Some other highlights include the ERP system replacement projects. So we know about the enterprise asset management system, which is going live this month or next month. Human capital management, which is basically internal payroll, as well as human resources. It's expected to go live January 2025. And then we start venturing into phase 3 of this project, phase 4 of this project. We don't have a go live date yet, but this is a part of my 25-26 work plan overall. As a consequence, this is going to have an impact on external customers. And so we need to make sure that we do this right. Probably the largest or highest touch point for a lot of people with the city is when they pay their utility bill. And so we need to make sure that we get that transition absolutely correct when we go live. Internally, we've only got maybe a couple people that would work on this project, the utility billing clerk, for the most part, the deputy finance director, myself, but you're not going to have a large internal team like you do for human capital management. And so we need that outside support to come in and support us through that phase. And then lastly, as council has kind of discussed previously, over the summer of this year, the 25-2030 capital improvement plan largely reflects council's decisions on parks, transportation, and facilities. And council knows well what kind of projects are included as within that. But then also under consideration is the capital projects for water, wastewater, and stormwater, which we've had some presentations on a little bit over time, and which we'll be coming back to as part of the utility rate study conversation when we do that. And so with that said, there are some financial highlights that I just want to touch upon too, in terms of revenues. The 25-26 biennial budget endeavors to provide a realistic forecast of revenues. The goal, which was to be neither overly cautious nor expansionary in approach. So the goal is to be as realistic as we possibly can. We don't want to be too conservative and therefore come back and say, hey, guys, we've got $5 million, something like that, right, overall, or too expansionary, where we're having to come back to and say, well, we haven't generated the revenue that we expected to. So we're trying to be as accurate as possible. And it also includes an estimate of revenues from the comprehensive fee study that we talked about earlier. In terms of reserve targets, the 25-26 annual budget is designed to meet the reserve targets as established in policy. It does not propose the spending of any reserves. So we're not anticipating using any reserves. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is a balanced budget too. We talked a little bit about this too. This is part of the financial management policy, where ongoing revenues should equal or exceed ongoing expenditures in both the proposed and adopted budgets. If the structural imbalance occurs, then a plan should be developed and implemented to bring the budget back into structural balance. And so, as part of the financial forecasts, what you're going to see with governmental operating is a balanced budget that we're proposing to you here today. There are some key uncertainties that I just want to touch upon a little bit that will impact the budget. It is important to keep in mind, biennial budget is a snapshot in time, a spending authority that can be amended. And so it's basically a proverbial living document. You have to keep in mind that there's two kind of outstanding items that we would have that could help us cement the budget. One would be the utility rate study. The utility rate study is process will determine the budget for the utilities overall. So basically right now, what we've got in there is a placeholder until some decisions are made down the road. The consultant is going to return in October with the cost of service analysis. So we're moving to that additional phase of the work overall. And then in addition to that, the North Bend Police Services contract. So we have developed a proposal. Ideally, we would have that conversation this week, but it may be taking place over the next couple of weeks with North Bend as part of the negotiation. But that could influence other aspects of the budget depending on what happens there. I know I've been talking a lot. Thank you guys for your patience. Next steps, tomorrow, we're going to continue the review and deliberation of the mayor's proposed budget. September the 9th, more review and deliberation. 16th and the 17th, department presentations. You're going to have the departments show up at your committee meetings and present to you basically 5 slides apiece describing their accomplishments for the current biennium, where they plan to go in the next biennium, and how much they need in order to accomplish that work plan. September the 23rd is another budget workshop regarding the review and deliberation of the mayor's proposed budget. And then basically that time period, we should be really kind of starting to finalize the budget and turning that into not just the mayor's proposed budget, but the city's overall proposed budget. So the goal for September the 30th, which is a 5th Monday month, would be a review of the final budget. And then ideally on October the 3rd, which is a Thursday, a review of the final budget and adoption. And then lastly, I've got some shooting stars here, some stars for people out here in the field. Special thanks to the department directors and division managers for their diligence and work in submitting their expenditure requests. And then in addition to that, a very special thanks to budget manager Jana Walker for her efforts in facilitating this entire process, from implementing a new system in Munis, to forecasting revenues, to asking the right questions of the departments, to putting everything together for tonight's session. So before we get to the financial forecast review itself, happy to entertain any questions. Otherwise, we can launch right into it.
Counselor Johnson.
All right, first thing is a comment that not saying that we shouldn't do the fee study or whatever. I mean, obviously, I'm not going down that road, but I just want to point out that even if you took those out, we would still be above water. So we're not balancing the budget here on something that the council may or may not approve at some point in the future, which may be somewhat different from what we did last time. And then the other thing is on page 35, this is the big question that I had that I just want to have a little bit cleared up was, and you could also see this on the other thing. What page was that? The biennial budget comparison. If we look at the, oh boy, now I lost it. Yes, thank you. At the transfers out, it starts at at the right page. Transfers out. Ah, here we go. Yeah, so in 21-22, it was 4.6 million. 23-24, it was 2.8. And now we're all the way down to well under a million. I was just curious why that seems to be declining on the transfers out for the general fund, and now it seems rather significantly.
So the major transfer out during this current biennium was basically to the non-utilities capital fund. So we had transferred $2.5 million basically.
Mhm.
You know, in money to fund the non-utilities capital fund. Can't quite recall what the previous biennium was, but it could have been somewhat similar, you know, overall. And yeah,
So we're just not transferring as much out
it's not
this
as
time.
proposing to transfer as much out. You have to also keep in mind that we transferred ARPA dollars into the general fund, and then some of that was flowing out as
That
well
makes sense.
to the capital funds, basically to support those as well through there.
Excellent. Thank you.
City Administrator Chambliss?
And part of that has to do with one-time monies. There just has not been the building that there has been in past years in the last biennium.
Yeah, so the Snoqualmie Ridge build out, a lot of the funds that we were transferring from the general fund to the non-utilities capital fund was primarily through those construction activities. Or construction sales tax revenue.
Any other questions for Finance Director Boutte? We have another presentation, but how about if we take maybe a 5-minute break? Does that work?
Yes.
So maybe come back at, it is 7:07, let's come back at 7:15 with that, 8 minutes.
Lock up, baby.
All right, so it's 7:15 and we've just returned from a break. And now is the presentation and review of the financial forecast. And I welcome Budget Manager Jana Walker to present.
Share, my computer's doing something.
It's one of those nights.
I'm sure you didn't need it, right?
Okay, that's a fun way to start. Good evening, everybody. Now we're into financial forecast. And first slide up, the next slide. Purpose of a financial forecast is to evaluate the current and future financial conditions to guide policy and level of service decisions. So the question of how are we doing can't really be decided by 2 years snapshot, which is what our budget is. So we try to forecast out 10 years so that we can get a better sense of where we're really sitting, where we're headed. And that helps us to plan for the future. We can identify future revenue and expenditure trends as you experienced when we relooked at our revenues and saw what options were available to us back in 2023 and 2024, early 2024. Things that could have an immediate or long-term influence on the city. It also helps us make informed decisions. When we see those lines crossing, we're notified. It's our notice that we need to do something so that as we step forward, we're not setting the city up for failure. And then along those same lines, it helps us to identify potential problems. So before they become major issues, this can include everything from budget deficits to changes in the economic landscape. Next slide is our 4 financial buckets, and Drew addressed all of these. The one that we're dealing with the financial forecast for 10 years is in that yellow-orange bucket, the governmental operating, and more specifically, it is our general fund. We are forecasting the general fund and its partner, the reserve fund. And those two work together to make sure that we are reserving 15% of our ongoing expenditures in accordance with management policy that's been set by council. So the big question that we always ask is the city of Snoqualmie financially sustainable? And that is answered in part by our 10-year revenue forecast. But as you all know, the answer is it depends. It depends on the actions that we take right now, because we are set up by the state of Washington to be limited. Our main source of revenue, those property taxes, are limited to 1% growth. And that basically puts some handcuffs on us, because when the CPI, when the inflation is at 3% or 5%, or even worse, as we've seen, we are still limited to that 1%. So are we financially sustainable? We are, if we're very careful and thoughtful about how we move forward, which is what we're doing here today. And if not, if we see those lines crossing, what do we do? What actions do we take? What can we do to balance our revenues with our expenditures? So looking at the economy as a whole, there's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. It appears that the US has navigated to a soft landing following the surge in inflation, meaning there's no huge crash that we've seen yet. Following the Federal Reserve's hike in interest rates, the economy is continuing to grow. It is slowing. We've seen inflation drop from high numbers. I think now we're closer to the 3%, 4% range. That feels a little bit more healthy. And employment growth remains, but is becoming a little bit shakier. We've seen changing job reports. Therefore, the economy is starting to cool down, maybe just a little bit. And we've also seen the Federal Reserve mention lowering interest rates for the first time in a long time. They're looking at that, and that's, I think, expected in September, our first rate cut. These interest rate cuts help to heat up the economy. They make people more inclined to borrow money. It's cheaper to borrow and invest. And so more of that happens as the Federal Reserve policy loosens a little bit. The expectation is 1 to 3 quarter% cuts this year, and possibly a 0.25% cut per quarter next year. So substantial cuts in our future potentially, but of course they are looking at the economic indicators just as we are, and that's all subject to change in what they see. A survey of several reputable forecasts puts the chance of recession at roughly 25 to 30% within the next 12 months. So recession is always a possibility, maybe a little bit higher right now than it is sometimes, but it's not imminent. We could continue with that soft landing, that trajectory that we're on right now. Other factors that may play a role, of course, things we can't control, geopolitical instability, consumer debt, and a commercial office real estate market that is not returning to its pre-pandemic condition. We've seen shifts, huge global shifts in how people work and where they work, and what will happen next is anyone's guess. Some other key uncertainties that are more local to us in Snoqualmie. The first is, you can see that we've crossed some of these off. These were our uncertainties. They're no longer. We had the public safety sales tax, which was passed by a voter referendum. There was the Teamster Local Union collective bargaining agreement, which was settled in 2023. We have the non-representative employees who are usually matched to the Teamsters, also settled early 2024. Snoqualmie Police Association collective bargaining agreement was settled during this current year. And we're waiting next year, we're expecting to go through the same process for our firefighters. We have the North Bend Police Services contract, which adds a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how any of that will go. So it's anyone's guess, and we're doing our best to guess, but those things are subject to change. Of course, there are other revenue decisions and changes, some of which Drew discussed today, and other service decisions. We can always address our levels of service. And that leads us to the governmental operating financial forecast. And that is on page, it's in your appendix. There's also a graph.
A1.
A1, okay. Very important, right there at the beginning of the appendix. You can see some of the numbers that are up there. The top half of that includes our ongoing revenues. So things like property taxes, sales tax, B&O tax, utility tax, and then there are other smaller items that fall in the buckets of charges for goods and services, licenses and permit fees, intergovernmental revenues, and other revenues such as interest, which currently is high, but isn't always a large part of our budget. Then we have our ongoing expenditures. That includes all of the employees that we have within the general fund. Everybody from Drew and my positions in finance to Director Chambliss or Chief City Administrator Chambliss, it changed. And the police, fire, human resources, community development, city clerk, communications. I hope I'm not missing anyone. And then we also have some of our non-departmental costs, including human services, the money that we give out to community organizations, court services, and then there's also some other things that can't really be pegged to a certain department, so we just put them in the bucket of non-departmental. And with that, if you look at the first two columns of data, those two green highlighted items, that's where we are for the current biennium. And as you can see, our ongoing revenues exceed our ongoing expenditures by 228,000 in 2025 forecasted. And then in 2026, it's forecasted to be 468,000. Once you have those numbers, you add in some of the one-time uses. We have, for 2025, we actually have an increase because we have two grants for community development, including the climate change grant and the paper to digital grant. Some other one-time uses include the administrative strategic plan, which you've heard mentioned, legal fees for negotiations, for union negotiations. There's legal fees to support other revenue items. There is the payroll recalculation, a comprehensive fee study, and then that is it level 6 wildland brush truck, type 6. And then finally, we have some professional services for community development to meet the climate change requirements. So those two items, they increase it for 2025, and then they decrease our, they increase the level of expenditure for 2026 by 162,000. Below that, we have our transfer section, which we've discussed. There's that larger transfer out to ER&R. to the equipment replacement and repair and replacement, and then also a smaller transfer out to arts and activities. When you get down to that yellow section, that's our reserve fund. And you can see that in the first few years, we are not requiring any transfers from the reserve fund or to the reserve fund. In, I think, 2029 is when we start transferring to the reserve fund. And that means that our expenditures, our 15% expenditure level is high enough that we need a little bit more money in our reserve fund so that we're meeting that target that we have. And then we have a change, let's see. You know, I'm not going to go into that. I think our graph will show it even better. So I'll go on to the next slide.
Well, question at this stage.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
The graph
Mm-hmm.
shows the lines crossing in 2029.
Yep.
But we're contributing to reserves or ending fund balance in 2029? How do I jive those two statements?
So in 2029, the lines cross so that our ongoing expenditures exceed the revenues, but we still have an ending fund balance that's positive. So if you go down to that large black line in 2029, you could see that our general fund reserve balance is $2 million. And we're keeping our reserves, that 15% requirement in our reserve fund. So we can move that $2 million into our reserve fund without affecting, without failing our management policy. And if we look at the graph on the next slide, it shows that the story just a little bit better. There's a point when too many numbers are just too many numbers. And you can see that blue circle in the middle. That's right at 2029. That's where our lines cross. That means that our ongoing revenues are being exceeded by our ongoing expenditures. And you can see a little bit of that shark fin again, as you saw in the past governmental operating financial forecast. And I believe that that's related to revenue for the mill site permitting, which we put in 2026, and then we remove it in 2027 so that that's not continuing eternally, because that wouldn't be very accurate. So it does make our revenue line a little bit bumpy. And you can just see that our ongoing revenues increase at about 2.1%, whereas our ongoing expenditures are increasing at 2.7%. So we have pushed that back. I believe before it was happening in 2026, we pushed it off 3 years, buying us a little bit more time and flexibility. On the next slide, you can see some of our forecasting key assumptions. So the first is that our property tax, we are assuming that it increases at 1.25%. We are, of course, constrained by statute to 1%. That's how much we can increase it every year. And then there's a little bit of infill that will happen naturally, and that increases our property tax. What we're not assuming, though, is that mill site development will go forward. So that is not included in our property tax assumptions. You can carry that forward to sales and use tax, which we're having increased at about 2.7%. That's actually increasing with the CPIU that's forecasted by the King County Economics Forecasting something. King County gives us a number and we use it. So those numbers are not affected by a potential large development within Snoqualmie. They're just increased based on CPIU. It does include the new 0.1% for public safety sales tax, however. Next, we have utility revenue, utility tax revenue that's increasing 4% annually on average. And that does include our guesstimates based on what's currently happening in the utility rate study. Those numbers will be settled further, though, by you when FCS comes back and gives us just a little bit more information. Charges for goods and services are increasing by an annual average of 2.1%. And this does assume that we get that additional revenue from the comprehensive fee study, which is estimated to be $100,000 in 2025 and $300,000 in 2026. And then our other revenues we're estimating will increase 1.8%. And we already addressed that mill development activity. This also accounts for the loss of revenue generated by the Salish Lodge and Spa and other tribal properties put into trust. We're currently estimating that to be about 330,000 in 2025 and 340,000 in 2026. Only within the general fund. There are other revenue buckets that are affected, but those are the general fund revenues. We addressed the Snoqualmie mill. It also includes the swap of 0.1% TBD sales tax. And that is something that we put all of the TBD sales tax into the capital funds. And we were proposing initially that we would move some of the utility tax that had been diverted to capital back into the general fund. So it does assume that that is approved by council. It does not assume a recession. So we're assuming that things will continue as King County has forecasted, which is, I think on average, I think it slows, right now it's around 3.5 and it slows to 2.7% of inflationary increases. The 25-26 expenditures are based on the proposed budget. And the outer years are based on the inflation forecast from King County. Oh, there it is, King County Office of Economic and Financial Analysis. Thank you. And it does assume that we have the same positions year over year. So no large changes. This is us continuing on the course that we're setting right now. And this does mean that for 25 and 26, we are in accordance with section 5.4 of the financial management policy, which stipulates that we have a balanced budget. And the objective is that we pay for all of our current expenditures with current revenues. Ongoing revenue should equal or exceed ongoing expenditures in both the proposed and adopted budgets. If a structural imbalance occurs, then a plan should be developed and implemented to bring the budget back into structural balance. So it is our goal that the decisions we make today can reflect that 10-year forecast, that we can consider that the lines do cross, that we need to be somewhat conservative today. Also, we don't want to hoard any cash, as has been mentioned. There's a tricky balance that we're trying to get every single time that we come up to ask you for money for the budget. We don't want to overestimate. We don't want to underestimate. We're just trying to get a really reasonable estimate of what's possible and what's probable and what should happen. But of course, there are lots of ways that we can balance this because the struggles that we have here in Snoqualmie are not unique. They're being felt all over in small towns across Washington state and probably the country, that we have to consider our levels of service and our economic development and our revenues. And we can move each one of those just a little bit or nudge them over time so that we eventually come to a balanced approach. And we can see ourselves heading that way already as we have some new sales taxes that are part of our revenues. As we all know, we are very reliant on property taxes. There are future goals. Mill site is a great example that if something like that came here, of course, our revenue picture would adjust a little bit. We would have a little bit more sales tax, a little bit less pressure on those property taxes that we're so reliant on. And that's a big part of why we looked at rebalancing revenues, just to explore that blue circle that we have. We've talked about levels of service today a little bit with the fire department. And of course, there are many ways that we can adjust those levels of service, and economic development is happening. And we consider look at that and try to work that into our forecast without relying on it when we know that things can fall by the wayside before they're fully realized. That is our financial forecast. You had a good look at where we are at now. It's 2029 is where our lines cross, which is a pushed back 3 years, I believe. Are there any questions about any of that detail?
Councilor Vaughn.
It is a very good, solid report. You know, the one thing that gives me a bit of pause or it's like, where's the fiscal cliff? And I'm not seeing it. Other communities are needing to make drastic changes. What's different about us versus so many of the communities that are forced to be constrained in their ongoing challenges.
I think
Jana.
I think Drew will have a really good answer, but the two that come to my mind, first of all, we had that 5% vacancy assumption that we've never used in the past and now that we're able to use. So we're experiencing pressures that raise our personnel and benefit costs, and we've just implemented a lever that lowers them a little bit. The second one is that we, in the North Bend contract. I'm gonna address that one. Or do you want to address me? That it hasn't always seemed like there's an equitable share between North Bend and Snoqualmie police services. So in this budget, we've attempted to make that a more equitable share. And we've decreased, for example, the chief and some of his staff were being charged 88% to Snoqualmie, 12% to North Bend. And we all know that Snoqualmie isn't using 88% of the police force. So we've pushed that down to 65%. So when you do things like that, and we're doing the same thing for internal service charges, we're also lessening the pressure. So we're looking at a lot of different things, or looking at things differently, maybe, that lessens some of the pressure that makes it not seem like a financial cliff.
Well, first off, I'd love to know the communities that you're consulting with about that for the most part. I think it's because of council's due diligence, right, over time. It's been a high emphasis to make sure that we set our city up financially responsibly over time, from the previous mayor to the current mayor. It's been a high objective overall, which is why we continuously, now I'm losing my voice for some reason, so this is great. Right, anywhere, where was I? Giving us overall, but anyway, there's been a concerted effort, right, to make sure that we stay ahead of the fiscal cliff, which is why we took the two actions that we did earlier this year for the most part. In addition to that, when you look at the solid waste contract, for example, and how that might influence our revenues, how potentially a North Bend Police Services contract could influence our revenues or expenditure picture, right, overall, all those come into play in order to push that curve out as much as possible. Fiscal cliff is still there. Now we're just forecasting it for 29. If we go into a recession, there's going to be other scenarios that we're going to have to approach council with about how to handle that situation in particular, for the most part. But through council's proactive approach and our ability to come back to you on a pretty consistent basis, say this is what the financial forecast looks like, that I think is a very positive benefit overall. If you're to look at other cities, they may not have that. They may focus a lot more on the accounting side, right, of the house necessarily than on the, looking backwards as opposed to looking forwards. And I think Snoqualmie has been very good about making sure that we're always constantly looking forward, which is why I think what we do here ideally is different from what you might see elsewhere.
Thank you.
In addition to that, I just want to point out one thing in A1. Those green boxes are actually, in my impression, very, very critical to understand. So for 25-26, regarding the row ongoing revenues over ongoing expenditures, you'll see that that's a positive number for 25 and 26 in green. What that means is we've met section 5.4, the financial management policy, and that is your cushion right there. If you start drawing upon that a little bit, and if it gets less and less and less, if we start adding additional elements to the budget overall, then you're actually going to see that fiscal cliff or that crossover point emerge even sooner, right, overall. If we decide to say no to some of the expenditures, that will ideally create some more capacity here, which will then push that crossover point out into the future. But right now, as a part of this budget, that's why we're telling you that what the mayor has produced is a balanced budget that we're showing you. Based on the assumptions that we've included as part of that, that's the 5% vacancy rate, that's the comprehensive fee study, that's the expenditures that we propose, that we do have roughly $230,000 above our ongoing expenses in 25 and $460,000 above our ongoing expenses for 26. So just want to make sure that's often where we're going to be turning to. If council changes things, we're going back to the financial forecast and seeing what that new number kind of looks like overall, and then reporting that back to you. So to me, those green highlights right there is really, really critical.
Counselor Johnson.
And you can check my math on this, but if we went with 100% full-time employment equivalent, whatever, for the general fund based on salaries and wages, what I just came up with is over the biennium, that would be an additional about 800,000 or so, which would be more than the 600 some odd thousand of adding the two green boxes together. So if we did that, we would sort of be there.
That's correct. And then we would probably pull back the firefighter, right, positions as a part of that too. So then,
Right.
yeah, that's why those two are tied together for this part.
Counselor, do you have any other questions regarding, I guess, sources, revenues,
We're gonna go into more detail.
or just budget in general?
More detailed than this.
Well, I got a whole book here. All right.
Sorry.
So non-departmental sustaining, et cetera, for $400,000 a year, what's that?
We can certainly go through each one and start describing for that, but that's gonna require some additional effort on our part to get those materials prepped and ready to go. Our goal is not to get into the line items, so we're trying to stay at the high level for the most part and not get into the account by account detail. In terms of the non-departmental, you mentioned sustainability, that includes your court services as well. Your prosecutor, your public defender is in that total right there.
Good.
There's some membership expenses associated with that in that total as well. And then I can't quite recall what else might be in there, but I think it's heavily revolves around the court services, prosecutor, public defender.
Right, and we've got
Oh,
those,
we got the court
got those
services
broken out in
Okay.
here. In appendix A. The only one I don't right off the hand understand is non-departmental sustaining.
Okay.
Um,
We can return
I'm-
tomorrow with,
I'm curious at your statement. I understand your statement of tonight that, and why I asked my question, because tonight would not be diving into the details, but when are we going to dive at the details? Is the intent to do that at the committee level for their appropriate areas, or was the intent that it's gonna stay at this high level?
well, I think our intention is we can get into the details. You will have the departments available to you, right, at the committee level in order to ask those questions of what that is. But our intention for, I think, these more general meetings is to stay at the high level. At the policy level for the most part, to set the tone and the direction of the budget itself. I think we've done a good job of estimating what those expenses are and making sure that we've built in what we need to appropriately in order to maintain the levels of service of the city. If you're requesting a different format to the budget document, right, overall, or if you're looking to see different tables or different ways in which we can break things out for you, I think we'd be happy to work towards that over time, but
So I'm
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
I'm kind of looking at, so the police and fire would go to public safety, and public safety would have an understanding of how those budget lines were brought forward and be able to educate the rest of us. This is the one responsibility that the Washington State Code does specifically call out is we are responsible. That council is responsible for the finances of the city. Okay, so, and that kind of drives me to a more detailed conversation. So, and again, in the past practice has been to work up those departmental levels through the appropriate committees. And to, then come in with any follow-on questions into the meetings like this. So that's the framework I'm assuming. Are you telling me different? What is the intent here?
I think that they will review with you what their budget is. But the council is to establish goals and priorities for the framework of the budget, and that's what we've taken and have applied to each department. Whereas we're to like develop it and you will enact the overall budget. So if you're looking for specifics, we can go back to the code. But we'll give you an overview of what each department has added in. And you kind of already received that with, you know, the number of employees we'd be adding, or if we're going to be adding any new services, such as like the wildland truck or things like that. Councilor Watton?
Yeah, and I want to echo the mayor's comments too, and I deeply appreciate Mayor Pro Tem Holloway's position and concern, and I think it's right that we go back to the committees. You know, from public safety, we've been talking extensively about overtime and how to mitigate it. And so for me, I'm thrilled that it's in this budget because we've been talking about the brush truck, and this is our opportunity to actually, you know, we've already have done some of those discussions in committee, and now we get to bring it full circle. And I totally agree that each of the committees where things end up in the budget, that we should take a deeper dive just so that we understand it. And as you say, that we can explain it back. And I totally agree with you on that.
Councilor Christensen?
Just so that I understand, appendix A7 was supposed to have department presentations on it and it does not have anything in there. Are these presentations that will be added after things are discussed at the committee and we have railroad of the questions asked and answered?
Correct. So the 16th and the 17th are the department presentations. Once those are completed and delivered to the committees, then they'll be inserted in.
Thank you.
So that's a lower level discussion.
Yes, I'm interested in what constitutes a deeper dive, right? And how we achieve that and what your guys' council's goal is when it comes to that deeper dive and what level we need to get to in order to achieve that. So
I need more spreadsheets.
I have questions regarding what that looks like, right? Overall, but we can try to devise a plan for how to tackle that aspect. What we've done is we've given you, the highlights for the most part. You've got highlights throughout the document that includes the major changes and additions. If we need to get down to how much is the repair and maintenance services account changing overall, then I think we're going to get lost a little bit for each department if we're going to have to get to that level. So we're happy to do that if we need to. But generally, I think it's a good budget. We've represented what the change is between the 23-24 biennial budget to the new one. It's 8.6%, which to me doesn't seem terribly out of alignment with 2 years worth of inflationary increases and so on. So there are ways in which you can judge the value of the budget that's been provided. And if we want to make modifications to it, if we want to swap one change or one addition, right, for something else, we'd be happy to explore that, right? It is council's prerogative, right, to determine what goes into the budget, and we will meet that basically through the conversations that we have here.
Okay. Do you have any other comments or questions? We do have a session planned for tomorrow night as well. And is there anything that you want us to focus on for tomorrow?
Feel like we covered it all tonight, right?
It looks good.
I
Let's
think we
pass
did.
it.
Huh? So, I mean, there were some questions that were asked earlier, so there's some information we could probably bring back depending on how much time it takes to put together. And then we also have a budget session next Monday.
Next Monday,
Right
round
before,
table.
it's a round table right before council meeting. So
Back to the question, I can field it tonight. The admin position.
Jeff, he can give you more information on the admin position for Parks and Public Works. I mean, do you want that detailed tonight, or do you have something that we should be covering? We have 3 hours planned for tomorrow night. Counselor Benson?
That'll be that'll be, I assume in the 5 slides that we get presented at Parks and Public Works. And I just wanted to ask, is one of those slides just gonna say questions?
There may be a title slide too.
And a content slide would be good too. Yeah, but we'll cover all that in
The committee.
I certainly can take a shot now. We have time or circle back, whatever the pleasure of council is.
I would prefer you have time. I worry that the reason we're having this discussion is due diligence was not done on the previous slide. Okay, so I don't want a knee-jerk answer. Being my question, okay, show me the math. No, we don't have a view phone machine. You can't bring out the view phone and go like that. So it's probably time to write something up and do that. Takes a little longer nowadays. Sorry, old comment.
Doesn't it feel like we got like a pound and a half of math right here? I mean, this is a lot of math we've been provided, don't you think?
And what math in there justifies the addition of the administrative
Do
assistant?
you think I've gone through all the math? I can't balance a checkbook.
So, again,
But to say that the due diligence hasn't been done, this is a lot of due diligence,
no,
it
it's a
seems to
due,
me.
no, I no
That
fault, but
particular-
we have to do the due diligence now.
Okay, fair
I
enough.
mean, why the added administrative assistant? Tell me why the additional 6 pumps? I think we got redundant pumps in our pump houses, and we got generators for each. We used to actually just roll a generator around. So why the 6 pumps? Educate me. Okay. Why those things? Okay. And we did a good job on, like, we had the fire discussion on the head count. We ought to understand the head count by each department. Okay, so when people ask us why, we can say, okay, cause.
Counselor Johnson?
Yeah, and I think that this is exactly what our due diligence is to look for the things and be like, okay, help me understand this part. But that's on us to look through it and find the things we're wondering about. So for example, if I were to look at under the administrative costs, and I look at supplies, and all of a sudden I see the supplies is supposed to be $50 million. I mean, are you buying all the employees $10,000 staplers? I mean, why? Right. That's my job, is to look at that line, even though that's not something that's a line on the bigger pages and the appendices, right? So I need to look for those problems. You need to answer this one right now, but I've got one on the non-utilities capital. Why did the services go down so much? What are non-utility capital services in the first place? And I know those were services. So it's not something you need to answer right now, but we'll circle back to that one as we go through this. And definitely there's kind of like the time that we need to read through and find those kinds of issues. And there probably is a good explanation, but we need to understand it because we're the ones who will really be held accountable at the end of the day. For having adopted it.
Counselor Watton?
And I totally agree. I mean, if we had a constituent walk up or a neighbor say, hey, I noticed this, why is this in the budget? Why are you passing a budget when, you didn't do your part of asking the question? So I guess for a purpose tonight is if any of the 7 of us have specific things between now and tomorrow night to actually just ping that to the mayor, the administration, to Mr. Boutte, so that they have time to be ready to come back and address it. I think that's fair. And it's part of what we should be doing as well. But I do appreciate all the work that's been put into this. It's very noticeable. So thank you.
But I would, send your questions to Drew and Jana, and then what we're doing is we will log those questions and put the information and share it with to everyone. So some of the information we can provide tomorrow night. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Okay, well, someone gonna provide that. Affordable Housing Fund has an ending fund balance of $1.7 million. We are proposing to spend nothing upon that and have an ending fund balance of $2.5 million. Ought to have a discussion. We ought, that bugs me, so that's probably a discussion you have, is that really our intent as council to do nothing?
Should.
Okay, non-utility capital fund jumps from $5.4 million in 2025 to $14.1 million in 2026. Help me understand the jump. Where's it? Another $10 million coming into that fund right there. That was page 15. On page 17, intergovernmental revenues jumps from one.
So are these questions you want us to write down for you and respond to you, or how do you want to handle this then, Mayor Pro Tem? And we can go through it. You can shoot them at us right now, but it'd be best if we can identify what your questions are.
I'm not gonna have time to do an email between now and then. I'd rather you take them now and you have time tomorrow to actually work them.
Okay,
Okay,
so which, as your,
You want me to go back?
what
And one
pages
of
are you
affordable
looking
housing, I
at?
think it's a council discussion.
Okay,
We ought to have some time. I'm
It's
not
my
looking at
fun.
you. I'm not
It's
looking
my
at you.
fun. No, just kidding.
Okay, but so one, I think that'll be discussion on affordable housing. That's for us. Because right now there's no plan to do anything in that area. Two, again, page 14, the non-utilities capital fund jumps to $14 million in 2026. It's $10 million jump. Help me understand that. Where's that revenue coming from to make that jump for $10 million? Okay,
We're on page 14
was
for
page
anybody
14.
following along.
thank you. And
I'm jumping to page 17.
Page 17.
Intergovernmental revenues jumps by 93%. Help me understand intergovernmental revenues and why that's jumping to that extent. And just down a little bit, transfers in 2024, 23 was $2.1 million, but it's nothing in the next biennium. We may have discussed that, but we did. Okay.
Is that the
Now that I'm
ARPA
thinking
one?
about it. That was it from what I've been able to read, just being handed this tonight. I do have, well, I got one other question. What page was that? I think that was page 21. Solid waste administrative fee. I want to know what the plan is for having that discussion. That's it from the other council members. May have other things.
so the non-utilities capital fund, so this is what we approved in July.
Utility administrative fee.
No, I know, for page 14, non-utilities capital fund, we approved that. We already went through what all the revenues were and how you were going to spend it in the different projects.
Okay, I'll go refresh.
Councilor Watton.
So would it be fair that, first of all, our first iteration of our questions will be addressed tomorrow night. The second one will be for our workshop on the following Monday night. So it's not like it's one and done. Is that a fair assumption?
Right. Oh, Council, City Minister?
Well, it depends on if I can get resources reallocated tomorrow to address some of these issues. Specifically, the pump question, I will have to pull the leadership of the sewer department out of their normal jobs to work on that. And if something's scheduled, which I think there is something scheduled at King County Council that they have to be involved in, there's no way I can get you that answer by tomorrow, but we will definitely get it to you at a future date.
Not tomorrow, take it to Parks.
That's fine.
But yeah, I mean, yes, so each time we will try to respond to the different questions. And so that's the purpose of all the different sessions that we have set up. Yes, Councilor Watton.
I do have to commend Mr. Boutte. I don't know why I'm doing this so often, but I'm just keeping a you do a very fine job of keeping track of all of the concerns that are brought up, and if you're not able, the staff is not able to address it, just as long as it's noted that it's under review and then we can check them off once. And you do this all the time, you check them off after it's been addressed with the council or with the committee.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I do have still concerns about the comprehensive fee study in that it includes some of the use of parks and our fields. And I guess the question would be, to the best of staff's ability, can you give me the best wet finger in the air to show which way the wind's blowing on where proportionally could those numbers come from? Because if we're thinking about, well, for birthday parties, someone ought to be able to put in at least $300 for a birthday at one of our parks. No way. I mean, it's our parks for everyone, right? We should have things that anyone would be able to afford. Just along those lines, just kind of, we have these separate little buckets here of where is it? Building permits, use of recreational fields, ambulance transfer, just the broadest strokes. Generally, where are we talking about that estimate for the 100,000 and the 300,000 coming from?
City Administrator.
So the purpose of this comprehensive study is actually look at the true cost of providing that service.
Sure.
And then provide council with the opportunity to set the discount rate. So council has it within their authority, for example, youth sports keeps kids off the streets and from causing bad things. So we're going to collect 60% of actual cost to prepare the fields for youth sports, etc. So the whole purpose of that study is to have that conversation with you so that you can make that decision.
Councillor Johnson.
And just to help me kind of visualize how much I want to bank on this, I guess I just want to have a sense of where the numbers came from. It wasn't just, well, our budget really needs an extra 100,000 from somewhere. Let's say that it's here. Not saying that happened. I'm saying, tell me what did happen. Right. And I know these are gigantic estimates. I mean, 100, which, by the way, as a science teacher, I love seeing this. 100,000 and 300,000. That's great. Don't show me numbers that are 100,000, 42, and then $347.32. Right? Like, where'd that come from? I love seeing the big round number. I just want to know why that. Why isn't it 1 million? Why isn't it 10,000? Right? Yeah.
Blasphemy.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Technically, the rest of the budget should probably look like those kinds of numbers. Just saying.
Nice increases. Okay. Councillor Benson.
Yeah, I'd just like to commend Councilman Watton for commending Drew Boutte.
Get that guy some more candy.
There you go. Do we have any other questions, or tomorrow we'll start right at 6 o'clock and try to respond to the majority of these questions. And then if you think of anything or see anything between now and then, please email it to us so we can look into, do some research on those. Okay. Any other questions? And early tonight.
I'll just say this is the start of a journey. It's not the conclusion, right? At all. That's not what we're proposing here. So thank you guys for kind of walking this pathway with us. It's one city combined together, trying to figure out how to move the city forward over the next 2 years. And thank you guys for your due diligence and what you do provide in terms of making sure that we can provide the levels of service that the citizens expect and that we can squeeze the most value that we can out of every dollar that we're given. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank both Drew and Jana on this. Like I mentioned, they spent many, many hours working on it. And then meeting with all the different supervisors and directors. I've probably sat in there along with city city administrator about 20 hours, talking with supervisors and directors about their budget. And then there was so much that went on behind the scenes at each of the departments where everyone sat down with their groups and came up with what type of service level they want to do and what does their budget look like this year or for the next 2 years. And if you look at the budget book, budget book, I mean, have you seen one from the city before like this? I mean, it's fantastic. So,
Mine's not sparkly.
no, well, anyway, so I would say nice work on this. So tomorrow night we will meet again at 6 and try to respond to the questions and send us more if you have any between now and tomorrow. And with that, I would entertain an adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
The move by Counselor Watton, second by Counselor Washington. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Any nays? We are adjourned. Thank you.